It wasn't typical for me to be working on a Saturday, but today was an exception. The only reason I found myself in Lancaster was to appease a high-priority client. I'm employed at PY Tone, a company that manufactures telephones, but not your average household devices. Ours are industrial grade, designed to endure extreme or hazardous environments. These phones are built tough and explosion-proof. Our primary clients are refineries, factories, oil rigs, and other operations that deal with harsh conditions. Today's task was to fix a minor issue at a large grain elevator, and I had just wrapped things up. I was refueling my truck before heading back to reading when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in a while. Jason Carpenter, what brings you down here today? It was Samantha Foster, an old family friend. She and her husband, Ethan, used to live just outside of Reading, and we'd socialized a few times over the years. It had been a while since I'd last seen her, so it was a pleasant surprise. Hey, Samantha, just handling a bit of work out in Mannheim for the morning. How have you and Ethan been? We chatted for about 10 minutes, catching up on life. Eventually, she invited me over to their place for a family barbecue. Since I wasn't in any rush, I decided to tag along. Samantha came from the coal regions, while Ethan and his family hailed from Lancaster. Most of the folks at the gathering were his relatives. Before heading over, I called my wife, Kelly, to let her know I'd been delayed by some old friends. As expected, she and Samantha got on the phone and spent a good 10 minutes catching up. It felt better to let Kelly know where I was. I didn't want her worrying. The barbecue itself was uneventful, except for one detail. I was introduced to Ethan's father, his two brothers, and a bunch of their kids, and they all had the same distinctive smile. On the right side of their mouths, the canine tooth stuck out, and whenever one of them smiled, their lips curled around the tooth, giving them this mischievous, pixie-like grin. My curiosity eventually got the best of me. Samantha, I have to ask you something. More beef or ribs? No, I'm good, thanks. I just couldn't help but notice. Ethan, his brothers, and the kids all have the same unique smile. What's up with that? She laughed. Oh, you noticed, huh? It's pretty hard not to, especially when they're all together like this. It's genetic. Ethan, his dad, and his brothers all have that funny little tooth, and they've passed it on to their kids. It'll probably keep showing up in the next generation, too. Cute, right? I nodded and let her get back to hosting, though the tooth stayed on my mind for a while. As I drove home to Reading, I had plenty of time to think. Kelly and I had been married for 20 years. We met back in college and just seemed to click. A couple of years later, I started working for PY Tone, where I've been for almost 19 years now. We have twin sons, Mark and Nick, who are 18 and set to start at Penn State in the fall, and a sweet 14-year-old daughter named Emma. Financially, we were banking on student loans and grants for the boys' education and hoping for something similar when it came time for Emma. Life was good. We had a comfortable house, 2 reliable cars, and I was just a couple of years away from vesting in my company's pension plan. Kelly and I had also been diligent about saving for retirement. Over the years, my company had asked me to relocate more than once, but Kelly wouldn't hear of it. Aside from that, we got along fine. Our sex life wasn't thrilling, but it was steady. I never thought much of it until recently, but in hindsight, things started to cool off right around the time Kelly got pregnant with Emma. She never turned me away, but the passion, the spark, it just wasn't there anymore. I figured that was just the way life goes, so I didn't dwell on it. When I got home, Kelly had a light supper waiting for me, knowing I wouldn't be too hungry after the barbecue. She asked about Samantha and Ethan, expressing her regrets for not being able to join. Emma was sitting across the table, eating quietly as usual, while the boys were off somewhere doing whatever teenage boys do. It was a peaceful enough evening, until Emma looked up at me and smiled. Her lips curled over her protruding tooth in that exact same way. That little pixie grin. Suddenly, I couldn't eat another bite. I excused myself from the table, stomach churning. There wasn't a shred of doubt in my mind anymore. Emma wasn't mine. She was Ethan's daughter. And now, looking back, everything made sense. Right around the time Kelly got pregnant with Emma, our marriage had started to cool off. It wasn't like she ever outright denied me, but the closeness, the connection, it just wasn't there anymore. I'd accepted our lackluster sex life as normal, never suspecting anything more. But now it was all falling into place. I wanted more from our relationship, and there were definitely times I wished for something better, but I didn't want to be that guy who constantly complains. Now, though, everything made sense on a deeper level. Kelly's frequent trips to Lancaster over the last 15 years left me with only one conclusion. This affair had been going on for a long time. Confrontation has never been my strong suit, but I knew I'd have to bring this up with her, and I hoped we could handle it like two adults. But the more I thought about it, the more my mind spiraled with questions. By the time I went to bed, I was a mess. I told Kelly I wasn't feeling well, blamed it on all the greasy food, and decided to sleep on the couch that night. The next day, I buried myself in the garage, tackling projects I've been putting off for ages, anything to keep myself busy and give me time to think. My mind was racing with possibilities, and I knew I had to do something about the situation. I wasn't the type to seek revenge, but I also didn't want to make things easier for Kelly and her lover Ethan. My first priority was the boys. Mark and Nick were mine, no doubt about that, and I had to make sure they'd be okay no matter what. Even though Emma wasn't my biological daughter, I still loved her, and I didn't want to do anything to hurt her. As for Kelly, well, I didn't want to hurt her either. I sure as hell wasn't going to end up supporting her and Ethan for the rest of my life. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't spend another day under the same roof with her unless something changed. Her reaction to the confrontation would decide everything. I figured the best time to bring it up would be after Sunday supper. Kelly was always a good cook, and that night was no exception. Dinner was great, as usual. The boys excused themselves to go hang out with friends, and Emma quietly finished her dessert before heading to the living room. Then it was just me and Kelly sitting there with our coffee. "You've had something on your mind all day, Jason. You want to tell me what it is?" I guess I wasn't doing a good job hiding it. I took a deep breath and just went for it. I've been wondering how long we're going to wait before telling Emma who her real father is. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Kelly let out a heavy sigh, her eyes slowly moving from the middle of the table to meet mine. "It's amazing it took you this long to figure it out," she said, her voice steady. "She doesn't need to know until she's 18, or unless some medical issue comes up. Everything's fine the way it is. Why complicate things now?" "Is that fair?" I asked. "To who?" she shot back. "Emma's got a stable family life, and that's what matters. She doesn't need to know the truth yet. I'll tell her when it's the right time. For now, just keep your mouth shut." I couldn't believe it. I had just called out her infidelity, and she wasn't apologizing, wasn't even sorry. In fact, she was acting like she hadn't done a damn thing wrong, as if life would just go on like this forever, whether I liked it or not. I wanted to yell at her, to let my anger out, but something caught my eye. There was movement in the hallway. Emma had been listening. I heard her scurry away before I could react. I took a breath and decided to stay calm. "Should we consider a divorce?" I asked. "I just told you it's important to maintain stability for a few more years," she said coldly. "A divorce is out of the question. What would Emma and I do? We need to wait until she's older and things are more stable financially." In that moment, it hit me. I'd be vested in the company's retirement plan in 2 years. If we divorced now, Kelly would walk away with part of my salary and a chunk of my retirement when she turned 65. She had it all planned out, every detail. She'd been thinking ahead this whole time, playing the long game. I sat there in silence, trying to wrap my head around it. "At least we don't have to pretend anymore," she added, her voice cutting through the quiet. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "For the last 15 years, I've gone along with it, giving you what you wanted so you wouldn't get suspicious," she said almost casually. "I thought you'd figure it out sooner, honestly. But at least that part's over now. We don't have to fake it anymore. And by the way, I'll probably be taking more trips to Lancaster from now on." I sat there, stunned. Not a word came out of my mouth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After all these years, she was acting like none of it mattered. Like I was the fool for taking so long to catch on. Neither of us said another word. "I'll be moving my things into the guest room while you and Emma take care of the dishes," I said. "I don't want to intrude on your space any more than necessary." Kelly shot me a glare, clearly annoyed. "You're acting like a spoiled brat, Jason. We can share a bedroom without being intimate. It's better for the kids." I didn't bother responding. That guest room had the most uncomfortable sofa bed, but at least I wouldn't have to sleep next to a cheating woman anymore. I was up and out the door before anyone else in the house had even stirred, not wanting to deal with questions from the kids about the new sleeping arrangements. After a quick breakfast on the go, I headed straight to work. I'd spent most of the night lying awake, thinking, making plans. There was plenty to do. My bosses at PY Tone were more than willing to sit down and talk when I told them I was leaving. The whole morning was spent rearranging things and clearing out my desk. By the time I sat down for lunch, finishing off a big steak sandwich, I found myself grinning like a fool. It felt good, knowing I was finally taking control of my situation. The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to the bank, meeting with my insurance agent, and job hunting. I got home around 3, which was unusual for me. "What the hell are you doing home so early?" Kelly asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "I quit my job," I said flatly. Her face twisted in disbelief. "What? You love that job. Why would you quit?" I just shrugged. "I've been working too hard for too long. I wanted to change. I start at DS Brown's feed mill tomorrow." "The feed mill?" She nearly spat the words. "What are you going to do at a feed mill?" "Loading trucks and freight cars. No stress, no responsibilities. Plus, I figure I could stand to lose a little weight." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Jason. How are we supposed to pay for the boys' college on minimum wage? What's going on with you?" "I don't have the pension anymore," I said, cutting her off. "I needed 20 years to lock at Indiana. I didn't make it." Her eyes narrowed. "What about severance pay? Vacation time? Sick leave?" "No, no, and no," I said. "You only get severance if they lay you off, and to get sick leave or vacation pay, you have to give 60 days notice." I didn't give notice. I just walked out. She was stunned. "What about Mark and Nick's college?" "That's no problem. We'll take out a second mortgage and prepay all 4 years for them. They can apply for loans or grants if they need to." Her mouth dropped open. "And how do we make 2 house payments, genius?" "Well, with the boys moving out, this place is too big for us anyway. We'll probably sell it." She shook her head, completely baffled. "You've lost your damn mind." With that, she stormed off, leaving me sitting there feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. My plan was officially in motion. Over the next 2 months, things between Kelly and me went downhill fast. The tension in the house was thick, but surprisingly, my relationship with Emma started to get better. She had turned into the perfect daughter, even though I knew deep down she wasn't really mine. I wasn't entirely sure how much she had overheard that night, but it seemed like she was trying harder to stay close. The second mortgage went through without a hitch, mostly because I had it all set up in advance. Every cent of that money went directly to Penn State, prepaying Mark and Nick's tuition. We couldn't afford the mortgage payments anymore, so the house went on the market. In the meantime, I quietly sold off my gun and coin collection, putting that cash in a safe place only I knew about. I traded in my BMW for a used Ford pickup, free of payments. Kelly and Emma kept their cell phones, but I canceled mine and told the boys they'd have to get their own if they wanted one. Money was tight, barely enough to cover utilities and groceries. We let the mortgage slide until the house sold, and luckily, the bank was understanding. When the sale finally went through, we cleared about $30,000. I took the entire check and bought Kelly a brand new Lincoln sedan. I'd done my homework, scoured the blue book, and made sure to pick the car with the highest depreciation rate I could find. In 5 years, that thing would be worth practically nothing. I hope she enjoyed it while it lasted. We ended up renting a small house in a modest part of town. It was cramped and far from what we were used to, but it suited the new reality just fine. Kelly started making even more trips down to Lancaster, and we never talked about it. I was trying to save a little from my paycheck, but it didn't amount to much. What she didn't know was that I'd already canceled and cashed in all our life insurance policies, funneling that money into my hidden account. Meanwhile, Emma and I were growing closer. She seemed to be pulling away from Kelly, which didn't bother me at all, but I could tell it annoyed Kelly. The boys were thriving at college, and when Emma's 16th birthday was coming up, I asked if there was anything special she wanted. She leaned in, whispered her request, and made me promise not to tell her mother. When Kelly found out what it was, she went ballistic. Emma had her right canine tooth pulled. Because of the way it was growing, the dentist was able to remove it without leaving a noticeable gap, just a small sore on her gum that would heal without a scar. Emma was ecstatic with the result, but Kelly was livid and didn't speak to me for a week. I thought it was a perfect gift, Working at the feed mill had its perks. I lost almost 30 pounds, and if the lighting hit me just right, it almost looked like I had abs. Probably just wishful thinking, but it felt good to imagine. At first, the job left me sore, but over time, the physical activity became something I looked forward to. Emma was in her last year of high school, and we became best friends. It wasn't something I pushed for, it just happened naturally. But I couldn't help feeling flattered. Then, out of nowhere, Kelly's mood flipped. She went from sullen and bitter to practically bouncing off the walls, all smiles and giggles like a little girl. I tolerated it for a few days, but finally, I cornered Emma. "What's up with your mom?" I asked. Emma looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to talk about it. She's being disgusting." "Disgusting? What do you mean?" I pressed. "She found out a few days ago that Samantha Foster has cervical cancer. The doctors gave her less than 3 months. Ever since Mom heard the news, she's been giddy. It's like she's enjoying it." I was stunned. "That's awful," I muttered. "Samantha never did anything to her." "I know," Emma said, her voice tight with anger. "She's being a real jerk about it." I frowned. "It's not nice to call your mother a jerk." Emma shrugged. "What else would you call her right now?" And as much as I hated to admit it, Emma was right. Kelly's behavior was despicable, and now that I knew the reason behind her sudden happiness, it was hard not to feel disgusted myself. I found it increasingly difficult to be around her, so I started working more overtime and spending less time at home. Emma would often come along, and we'd wander around the mall for hours, neither of us wanting to go back to the house. Then, 3 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. Since Emma would be turning 18 before it was finalized, custody wasn't an issue. We had no house to split, no money in the bank, and Kelly wasn't asking for alimony or support. It was as simple as a divorce could get, just a declaration of incompatibility. I signed the papers without hesitation and quit my job at the feed mill that same day. On my way home, I swung by the PY Tone office to tie up some loose ends, made a quick stop at the bank, and then headed back to the house. Kelly wasn't there. Emma told me she'd gone to Lancaster for a few days to console Samantha. We both laughed at the iMarky. I handed Emma an envelope with $10,000 in it. "I'm sorry it's not more," I told her, "but I'll send some later when I can. I have to go now, but you'll be fine with your mom." She wasn't happy, but she helped me pack my truck without complaint. I didn't care what happened with the house. Kelly could deal with that after I was gone. I had no idea what Emma's plans were after high school, but I trusted her to figure it out. She volunteered to tell the boys about the separation, but she warned me she wouldn't be able to stay unbiased. 6 weeks after I left, Samantha Foster passed away. My old buddy Ben Kalita, who lived in a double-wide near the Ocala National Forest in Silver Springs, Florida, welcomed me with open arms. Well, technically he lived in a place called Moss Bluff, but no one's ever heard of it. Ben had retired from the Air Force, and he and his wife, Linda, spent most of their time fishing and hitting up yard sales. Ben had been inviting me to come down for years, so it was nice to finally have a place to escape to. I'd always been captivated by those fishing shows where they hauled in massive fish using crazy-looking lures. Ben spent the next few weeks proving to me that those shows weren't exaggerating. He taught me how to use a jiggerbug, skimming it over lily pads, and it was thrilling to see those big bass burst out of the water to snatch it. It was fun for a while. Those first few months felt like a real break, but eventually it started to wear thin. I hadn't heard anything from back home, mostly because no one had a clue where I was. The only thing on my mind was counting down the days until the divorce was finalized. Ben and Linda were well aware of the situation and had been incredibly supportive. The plan was that the day after the divorce was finalized, Ben and Linda would drive me to Orlando International Airport. Packing was easy since I wasn't taking much, and as a thank you for putting up with me, I left Ben the old Ford pickup. But just as we were about to pull out of the driveway, things took a strange turn. A black SUV pulled up behind us, blocking us in. Ben looked confused. He had no idea who these people were. 2 men got out and introduced themselves. Gregory Miller and John Evans, FBI agents. "We're looking for Jason Carpenter. Can you help us out?" Miller, the spokesman, asked. I didn't say a word, just raised my hand slightly. "Mr. Carpenter, we need a few minutes of your time. Can you help us out?" I shrugged. "Sure, no problem." Ben and Linda exchanged small smiles with the agents before heading inside. The three of us sat down at the picnic table on the front patio. Gregory placed a small recorder and a notebook in front of him. "So, tell us about your plans for Lisbon, Mr. Carpenter." "Nothing much to tell," I replied. "I'm starting a new job, and it happens to be in Lisbon." "Why now?" Miller pressed. "I'm guessing you already know my divorce was finalized yesterday. I wanted to wait until it was official before starting the new job. Is there a problem with that?" "No, not at all. We're just trying to confirm a few details." I leaned forward. "Cut the crap. Why are you really here, and what do you want?" "I've got a plane to catch, and I'm not in the mood for games. So, get to the point." Miller and Evans exchanged glances before Miller closed his notebook. "Ethan Foster was killed yesterday in a car bomb explosion. Given the circumstances surrounding your divorce, we felt it was necessary to talk to you." I blinked in disbelief. "Well, that's some timing." I took a breath, knowing where this was going. "As I assume you figured out, I've been down here for the last 3 months, and Ben can vouch for that. I don't know a thing about explosives, and honestly, I had no reason to want Ethan dead. If anything, he did me a favor. I was happy to be rid of the cheating woman. His affair with my wife didn't bother me. I was ready for it to be over. Sure, I'm annoyed that I spent 16 years raising his daughter, but not enough to kill him." Miller nodded slightly. "We know who planted the bomb, and we're aware it wasn't you. What we need to figure out is whether you paid to have it done, or if you know the person responsible. Tell me who you think did it, and I'll tell you if I know them." "Do you know a man named Vincent Romano from Westchester?" I shook my head. "Never heard of him. I don't know anyone from Westchester, period." "Did you check phone logs and all that? How are you so sure it was him?" "We found no phone records connecting you to Mr. Romano or anyone else in Florida over the last month," Miller explained. "The technique used in the bombing was crude but effective. Romano has a history with this kind of setup. He's used it before, but we've never been able to pin him down." "So what exactly are you hoping to get from me?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know anything about the bombing. I don't know Vincent Romano, and I couldn't care less if Ethan Foster is dead or alive. If anything, I'm grateful. The guy was the reason my wife left me, and for that, I owe him thanks. No hard feelings, honestly." Miller and Evans stood up, closing their notebooks. "We just didn't want to leave any stones unturned. I'm sure you understand." "Will you be available if we need to speak with you again?" Agent Miller asked. "Most certainly," I replied. "I'll get in touch once I'm settled." For hours later, I was on my way to Lisbon. The flight gave me plenty of time to reflect on the past few years. My relationship with Kelly had been deteriorating for a long time, and I'd been too clueless to realize she was cheating on me. To top it off, I'd unknowingly raised her love child as my own. The funny thing is, after learning that Emma wasn't mine, I grew even closer to her. I genuinely loved her, and that wasn't going to change. Once I realized Kelly had been scheming to get her hands on my money and retirement benefits, I made moves to stop her in her tracks. Tone was more than happy to suspend my employment for a few years if I agreed to run their new European operation. The timing couldn't have been better for both the company and me. I hadn't anticipated Ethan's wife dying, but with Emma close to finishing school, it didn't seem to matter much. My new role as VP of Continental Operations came with a hefty pay raise, excellent benefits, and the restoration of my old retirement plan. Plus, I had a secret stash of money tucked away, so all my financial matters were in order. The only thing that nagged at me was not being able to do more for Emma at the time, but I promised myself I'd make it up to her eventually. Mark and Nick were wrapping up their studies at Penn State, and everything seemed to be falling into place for them. I hadn't checked in on Kelly or Emma in about 3 months, but I figured I'd catch up once I got settled. The interview with the FBI had gone more smoothly than I'd expected. I found it strange how quickly it was over, but I didn't dwell on it much. Instead, I pushed it to the back of my mind with a quiet sigh of relief. Still, part of me couldn't help but wonder what had really happened. Settling into my new home was easier than I'd imagined. I had a team of underlings who'd handled most of the details before I even arrived. The villa they selected for me was nothing short of breathtaking, perched on a hillside with a stunning view of the harbor. I was signed up for language lessons twice a week and had ample time for private tutoring. As they say, Life was good. For some reason, I hadn't reached out to Emma or Kelly yet. In fact, aside from the company and the twins, no one even knew where I was. Mark was attending grad school at Texas A&M, and Nick had become a second lieutenant in the Army, thanks to ROTC. They mentioned that Kelly had shown up at their graduation, but no one brought up the separation or divorce. They both agreed not to tell her where I was, and they hadn't asked where she was living or what she was doing. From what they said, Emma had filled them in on everything that led to the divorce, and she hadn't sugarcoated it. They seemed a little bitter toward their mother, which, honestly, didn't surprise me. Despite it all, I was proud of all three of my kids. A year passed, and things were going well. Then, in early April, I received an invitation to Emma's wedding. Unfortunately, by the time it reached me, the ceremony had already taken place 2 weeks prior. Inside was a small note saying she had hoped I could give her away, but only if I received the invitation in time. Missing the wedding hit me hard. I felt awful about not being there for her. It didn't take long for my assistant to dig up the contact info for Emma and her husband, Victor Moretti, who were now living in King of Prussia. I called her right away. "Hi, Emma. It's Dad," I said when she answered. "Dad, you got my invitation. I've missed you so much." She was bursting with excitement. Hey, slow down," I chuckled. "Everything's fine. I'm just sorry I didn't find out about the wedding in time. I feel terrible for missing it." "It was wonderful, Dad," she said. "Other than you not being there, everything went perfectly. I really wanted you to walk me down the aisle. But Victor's great. You'll love him. He just finished his electrical engineering degree at Drexel, and he's hoping to land a job in a couple of months." Emma was talking a mile a minute, her enthusiasm about the wedding and catching up with me pouring out in waves. I couldn't help but smile. I was genuinely happy for her. "I didn't get you a wedding gift," I admitted. "What do you need or want?" "Honestly, Dad, I just want to see you and have you meet Victor. Can you come home?" "Not right now, but how about this? Why don't you and Victor come visit me instead? I've got plenty of room here, and it's a beautiful place. I'll even arrange for the tickets if you two can figure out the timing." Emma sounded excited. "That sounds amazing. Let me talk to Victor and see what we can do. Can I call you tomorrow? What's the best number?" I gave her my contact info, and before hanging up, she said, "I love you, Daddy. I miss you so much. I can't wait to see you. I'll make this work. Don't worry." When I finally met Victor, he turned out to be everything a father could want for his daughter. He was handsome, hardworking, and ambitious. I liked him right away and could tell he would take good care of Emma. Even though I knew she wasn't my biological daughter, my love for her hadn't changed. She was still my girl. Emma was more than happy to fill me in on what had happened with her mother. After Ethan's death, Kelly found herself cut off from his family. They seemed to believe she had something to do with the circumstances surrounding his death, and word about her affair with him while Samantha was still alive had made her unwelcome in their circles. Without Ethan, Kelly had no means of supporting herself, so she was now working at Zinn's Diner by the Turnpike and living in a mobile home near Lancaster. While Emma was getting ready for dinner, I had some time alone with Victor. "So, any big plans now that you've graduated, Victor?" I asked. "Mainly just finding a good job," he said. "Emma's agreed to relocate if we need to, so that gives us a lot of flexibility. I'd rather find something I enjoy than be stuck in a place I don't like." "I can relate to that," I nodded. We chatted for a bit about his studies at Drexel and the kind of work he was interested in. To my surprise, Victor spoke pretty decent Italian, which he'd learned from his grandparents while growing up in Philly. That got me thinking. PY Tone was planning to open a service office in Parma, and the only thing holding us back was finding someone who spoke the language. Experience wasn't as crucial as education and managerial ability in this case, and I started wondering how I could make this work. Having Emma close by would be a big plus. Just as I was mulling it over, Emma came down, looking as beautiful as ever, and we all headed out to dinner. On the way, we were casually chatting when I asked, "Emma, since I couldn't be at the wedding, who walked you down the aisle?" "Victor's Uncle Vincent did," she said. "He introduced us, and he was more than happy to step in. He also gave us a very generous wedding gift." Victor laughed. "Yeah, I never expected a $10,000 gift from anyone. It was a huge surprise. Uncle Vincent's a great guy, but he doesn't really have a job. Not sure where his money comes from, but we sure appreciated it." I smiled. I'll have to send Uncle Vincent Rocco a nice thank you note. Oh no. Emma corrected me, grinning a bit. His last name isn't Rocco. It's Romano. He's on my mother's side. I froze for a second, my mind racing. I glanced at Emma, who was smiling, a grin that reminded me of her pixie-like charm, only this time without the telltale curl of the tooth. And just like that, the story took a twist I didn't see coming. Life has a funny way of looping back around, doesn't it? After the divorce, Jason tries to rebuild his life and distance himself from his past troubles. He moves to Florida, where his old friend Ben Kalita and his wife Linda welcome him with open arms. They live in a quiet home near the Ocala National Forest, and the peaceful surroundings help Jason start to clear his mind. Ben, a retired Air Force man, has been inviting Jason to visit for years, and now, finally, Jason takes him up on the offer, hoping for a fresh start away from the chaos of his recent life. At first, life with Ben and Linda feels like a much-needed break. Ben teaches Jason how to fish, and they spend hours on the water, catching large bass and enjoying the simplicity of the outdoors. It's a stark contrast to the busy life Jason used to live, and he appreciates the quiet and calm. For the first time in years, he feels like he's getting control over his life again, even if it's temporary. But the relaxation doesn't last long, as Jason soon finds himself haunted by the unresolved issues of his past. Although Jason has cut off most communication with Kelly, Emma, and his sons Mark and Nick, the thoughts of what happened still weigh heavily on him. He regrets not being there for Emma's wedding and feels the pain of missing such an important moment in her life. He knows deep down that even though Emma isn't biologically his daughter, he'll always see her as his own. The guilt of not being able to walk her down the aisle lingers in his mind, and he wonders how much damage the divorce has really caused to their relationship. Meanwhile, Jason's financial situation improves. He lands a high-paying job as the VP of Continental Operations for PY Tone's European branch, and he's able to set aside a considerable amount of money, ensuring a stable future. However, the shadow of Kelly's betrayal still looms over him. Knowing that she spent years plotting to secure a piece of his retirement and income only deepens his resentment toward her. The realization that he had raised another man's child for 16 years without knowing the truth still eats away at him, even though he loves Emma as much as ever. As time passes, Jason grows closer to Emma, and their relationship strengthens despite the distance. When she invites him to her home in King of Prussia to meet her new husband, Victor Moretti, Jason is both excited and nervous. He's missed a lot in her life, and the fear that his absence has caused a rift between them makes him anxious. Nevertheless, when he calls Emma after missing her wedding, her enthusiasm and love immediately put him at ease. Emma and Victor eventually travel to visit Jason in Lisbon, where he has settled into his new role. The moment Jason meets Victor, he feels an instant connection. Victor is everything a father could want for his daughter: intelligent, ambitious, and respectful. The two bond quickly, and Jason is relieved to see how happy Emma is with her new husband. It's during their conversations that Jason learns more about Kelly's situation after Ethan's death. Emma reveals that Kelly has been ostracized by Ethan's family. After Ethan's death in a car bomb explosion, his family began to suspect that Kelly might have been involved, given the scandal of their affair. Although there is no evidence to support such claims, the rumors spread quickly. Kelly's reputation in Lancaster plummets, and she is forced to find work at Zinn's Diner while living in a mobile home, a stark contrast to the comfortable life she had hoped for. Jason feels a sense of ironic satisfaction knowing that her plans have unraveled, but there's also a part of him that feels pity for her, even after everything she's done. As Jason, Emma, and Victor spend time together, he begins to consider how he can help them build a better future. Victor's background as an electrical engineer impresses Jason, and when he discovers that Victor speaks fluent Italian, Jason starts thinking about how he could involve Victor in PY Tone's plans to expand their service office in Parma. It would give Victor an excellent career opportunity and also allow Jason to stay close to Emma and be more involved in her life, something he deeply wants after missing so much. Just as things seem to be looking up, a surprising twist comes during a casual dinner conversation. Jason asks Emma who walked her down the aisle in his absence. She tells him that it was Victor's Uncle Vincent, who not only introduced the couple, but also gave them a generous wedding gift. When Jason tries to recall if he had heard the name Vincent Rocco before, Emma corrects him with a smile, revealing that his real last name is Romano. He's on Kelly's side of the family. At that moment, Jason freezes, his mind racing. The name Vincent Romano is familiar for reasons that chill him. It's the same name the FBI agents mentioned when they were investigating Ethan's death. As Jason processes this new information, Emma's pixie-like grin, now missing the signature tooth curl, only deepens his sense of unease. Life, it seems, has a strange way of looping back around, and Jason realizes that there might be more to Kelly's tangled web of secrets than he ever imagined. With new questions swirling in his mind, Jason is left wondering how deep Kelly's connection to Vincent Romano goes and what other secrets are still waiting to be uncovered.